I'd like to introduce this session related to our working package on the European conceptual framework on family support. The session is entitled Challenges and Innovations in the Conceptualization and Delivery of Family Support in Europe. I want to also remind you that you can start using the Telegram channel to post questions and comments that will be answered at the end of this session. And this session will be chaired by our colleague Helen Dunn, who is an independent consultant in family support in Northern Ireland. Helen, the floor is yours.
Everyone, you're all very welcome to our presentations today. We're going to start the session with our introductory video. We hope you enjoy it.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Carmel Devaney from the University of Galway in Ireland, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this Working Group 2 presentation on the challenges and innovations in the conceptualization and delivery of family support in Europe. Before we start, please let me introduce my two co-leaders from Working Group 2, Professor Angela Abela from the University of Malta and Dr. Harriet Churchill from the University of Sheffield in England. Harriet, Angela and I will be presenting to you this morning. Working Group 2 is made up of over 30 members. We're a large group comprising academics from a range of psychology and social or political science disciplines, as well as major European NGOs and agencies working in the field. We had a remit to undertake research reviews and knowledge exchange activities in order to develop a coherent and comprehensive conceptualization of family support in ways that would uphold children's rights and promote social justice and gender equality. And this is what we present to you this morning. To inform this task, Working Group 2 completed a series of linked scoping studies, which incorporated three distinct strands. First, I led on a subgroup which undertook a review of academic literature that examined issues, research and analysis presented in the literature about how formal family and parenting support has been conceptualized, developed and delivered in European countries. And as another working group in the network focused on approaches to service and programme evaluations, we omitted this from this particular review. Secondly, Angela led on developing a compendium of national reports from 27 European countries with representatives in Eurofamnet. And it was based on a national response to a questionnaire which asked about the social trends, the policy arrangements and reforms, and key family support provisions, innovations and challenges. And the report captures those trends and issues related to the national context for children, for parents and families, as well as some of the key features of national approaches to family support policy and provision. And finally, in a third subgroup, Harriet led on a review of international and European policy frameworks and standards, providing a review of relevant policy and provision standards and frameworks adopted by the United Nations, the Council of Europe and the European Union, concerned with the rights to and provision of child, parental and family support among member states. Working Group 2 also developed a number of academic papers and hosted webinars in order to develop and advance our understanding of and thinking about family support in Europe. And we then synthesised the findings of these three scoping reports, the academic papers and the events in order to refine our thinking in this area and to develop a multi-dimensional and multi-level framework for conceptualising family support in Europe. I'm using the term family support as an overarching concept to include the wide range of supports and services for children, young people and parents, or for parents or children, and on a wider level for families as a whole and indeed for communities. This framework incorporates three interconnected aspects of family support, namely family support policy, family support provision and family support practice, all of which are interlinked but also operate in distinct ways and have quite distinct influences. Our contention is that all three domains, independently and in how they are interrelated, influence access to, experiences of, and outcomes for children, young people, parents and families who are availing of support. This framework also emphasises how these three domains need to be informed by a participatory ethos, critically including the views and experiences of those that avail of services as well as those that provide that service. And based on the work of Working Group 2 and EuroFamNet as a whole, we now take forward a more coherent agenda in family support, promoting participation and collaboration with children, parents and communities at all three levels of policy, practice and provision. We highlight the need to address constraints and challenges in the field that relate to tensions and limitations at the level of policy reform, adequate and sustained investment in service provision, and agreed practice orientation, standards and qualities. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Harriet Churchill.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everyone. So in my presentation, I'm going to speak further about policy frameworks related to family support in Europe, and particularly pull out some key synthesized findings and recommendations from our three scoping studies, which you were just introduced to. So just to say, first of all, broadly what I'm going to be talking about and thinking about is, in broad terms, national policy frameworks for rights and provisions related to family support and their delivery and their development. So we're thinking in quite broad terms about the role of the state in relation to families and family support and support for children and parents, and also breaking down the role of the state in terms of thinking about the various departmental governments in relation to the state, public agencies and public services, and publicly funded or part-funded community services. So first of all of our scoping studies to some extent considered the policy frameworks and the policy context related to family support, but particularly our review of United Nations and Council of Europe human rights frameworks, particularly thinking about the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as European Union social policy frameworks. We've heard about these frameworks already this morning as well. So they're particularly thinking about family-friendly employment measures, social investment strategies, and social rights strategies advanced by the European Union, and of course the Child Guarantee more recently. So if we consider all of these frameworks, we see significant intergovernmental agreements related to European countries, for European countries to establish pretty wide-ranging rights to family support and to develop provision in terms of economic support, employment support, community and professional social services, and health, education support-orientated services for children, parents and families. However, we do also see some limitations and some challenges in relation to the realisation of these frameworks, as well as the scope of the frameworks to some extent. And to briefly highlight a couple of those, these limitations can relate to the distinct roles and competencies of European-level policy agencies, but also to some extent, although as we heard this morning in relation to developments around the Child Guarantee and different strategies at EU level, we're moving in the right direction, but to some extent there can still be quite disjointed debates, particularly focusing on social protections and employment support, and perhaps childcare services in relation to that, in some senses, a bit separate from developments in relation to social services and parenting and family support services. And overall, one of the key limitations is it's the national level of policy making and decision making, national and local level, that really drives developments in family and parenting support. And we see quite varied national engagement and implementation of some of the frameworks, such as fully realising the Convention of the Rights of the Child and children's rights to parental and family support, as well as some of these other frameworks. And this can kind of muddy the waters in terms of what we mean by family support and what's the scope of family support in terms of a policy framework and the developments of rights and provisions in a coherent sense. And then in terms of our literature review study, here we see very well-developed conceptualizations of family support. Many members of EuroFamNet have contributed to those in the literature. So thinking about family support as a social services paradigm has really been developed, as well as a social policy paradigm has really been developed in the literature. And some of the key principles here are around the importance of rights to universal as well as targeted family support. And as I say, family support in economic support, employment support, and support services terms, as well as the importance of holistic frameworks for understanding family support needs, the range and diversity of needs and circumstances in relation to children's support needs and parental and family support needs, and holistic understandings of childhood and family life in terms of the wider social ecology that impacts on childhood and family life. Angela Abela's presentation will pick up more in terms of some of these key principles for provision. However, we also see at times in the literature family support again being defined in a narrow way or not being supported by a clear definition or conception of family support. Then in terms of our national report study, we see a rich diversity of contexts and provisions, and there's a rich context there for significantly more cross-national policy learning in terms of family support, and we see significant progressive developments, particularly around early childhood services, around parental leaves, around positive parenting initiatives. But we also see quite patchy developments in countries, particularly also we've seen some cutbacks in provision with austerity measures, and then particularly with the current high levels of support needs, we see significant gaps in provision. So we want to particularly highlight 3 ways forward in relation to thinking about the policy framework for family support. Firstly, one of the key next steps is to ensure that policy frameworks are informed by a broad conceptualization of the scope and value of family support in society. So a broad framework to orientate the goals of national policy and the scope of national policy strategies and reforms. So here we're not thinking about family support as a distinct type of service. We are thinking about that, but not only thinking about family support in those terms. We're thinking about family support as a national system of support and services that's coherent and comprehensive and can meet the diversity of needs and recognises the diversity of circumstances for children and families. So we have built on the current literature to come up with this kind of broad position and conceptualisation of family support. So we're emphasising that family support in general terms is the mobilisation and provision of resources and support for sustaining and enhancing family roles like parenthood, for example, and family assets like relationship qualities and social care in families, and promoting the well-being and capabilities of family members, particularly children and parents in terms of our focus. So we're really emphasising here resources and support. So we're talking about support services, community and professional services, but we're also thinking about resources like the time for parenting, information about services, housing support, internet access even, access to community facilities and opportunities. So then the second element of our conceptualisation emphasises that family support is not only delivered and supported by the state, but primarily and importantly involves informal family support delivered within community networks, social networks, and semi-formal support in terms of more organised kind of volunteering roles or community groups in society, and then the range of universal and targeted formal provision and services. So we're thinking there about state-regulated, state-funded, state-provided, but also state-funded and provided by non-governmental organisations as well. So the more formalised services, there's an emphasis on making sure that family support is provided in a timely and enabling way for children, parents and families, and as much as possible, so an emphasis on early intervention there, and as much as possible on an ethos of participation and promoting and nurturing the role of communities, the informal aspect and semi-formal aspect of family support as well. So our second overarching message is that if we put together at a national level, and then I'm highlighting this in terms of the European and international level of policy frameworks, if we put together the various progressive policy frameworks that have been developed and we build on them in terms of some of their limitations, we have a very comprehensive framework in terms of the key components of a progressive rights-based European policy framework. Obviously, specific countries will develop this framework in specific ways and articulate it in specific ways relative to context and national and local needs, but there's a very comprehensive framework there. So if we put together the Convention on the Rights of the Child with its emphasis on children's rights to equality, welfare and family life and the significance of family and parental support in relation to that, we add in the European Commission's Investing in Children, 3 pillars, particularly in terms of tackling childhood disadvantage. Here we have an emphasis on access to resources, economic resources, material resources, employment opportunities for parents. We have an emphasis on access to high-quality services and a spectrum of services for children and families. And we have an emphasis on children's participation in society and in relation to decision-making that directly affects their lives. And then if we add in there the emphasis on family-friendly employment rights, perhaps most recently expressed at the European Union level in terms of the recent Work-Life Directive, we have an emphasis on flexible working rights, paternity leave rights and parental leave rights and paid employment leave for parents. We can add in the child guarantee with its very strong emphasis on, very strong emphasis on a guarantee rights to essential services for children in need and children at risk, as we heard earlier this morning. And then we can add in the Council of Europe's framework around positive parenting, which particularly emphasises the way that the state, through its funding of community facilities and support, can nurture community support and social networks and social support for parents. Add in the importance of a spectrum of universal and targeted family support services, positive parenting campaigns, and then parental and community participation in decision-making alongside children and young peoples. And I'll just finish up with emphasising the third kind of key message that we'd like to put forward in terms of a comprehensive policy framework, and this is in terms of a comprehensive strategic approach to policy development, evaluation, and funding. So essential aspects here are cross-government national policy strategies being developed with an explicit and comprehensive focus on family and parenting support, and these are routine and continuous and not just time-limited without a follow-on. A comprehensive approach to policy and national systemic coordination across all relevant areas and levels of government, as well as the state, NGOs, professional groups and communities, an emphasis on evidence-informed policy making and funding and resources for policy and programme evaluation and learning from that, embedded approach to research and development and stakeholder consultation, sustainable funding strategies for family support, and a particular emphasis on developing a national framework of workforce and professional development and investment in these areas. Thank you. So I will now pass over to Professor Angela Abela.
Thank you, Harry. So, good morning, everyone. As you have heard, our conceptualization of family support is across Europe is very much based on the synchronization of policy, provision, and practice. And what I will be focusing on now is provision and practice. What do we mean by provision? As Harry has already mentioned in some detail, we are referring here to a range of resource-based and service-based provision, which include family and parenting support services, targeted at children, young people, parents, families and communities, economic support, which is very important, employment and early childhood education and care, among others. Now, to look at the opportunities, tensions and dilemmas in terms of provision, our cross-country reports gave us an opportunity to see how different countries are developing their services and how we can learn from one another. However, it was not always clear from the reports what such strategies were meant to achieve. What were the principles underlying such support? For example, how anti-poverty and anti-inequality measures are linked. How resource constraints are managed, who goes down first, how collaboration, coordination, and interprofessional support are optimized. Obviously, these different aspects of the national strategy are very important to the kind of integrated and coordinated supports that we are proposing, and that is an area that could be addressed. There is also we have noticed that there is widely implemented support targeted to vulnerable groups, but there is often a gap in the continuum between support and protection. And here, I think the conceptualization of McGregor and Devaney in 2022 about protective support and supportive protection is very pertinent. McGregor and Devaney argued that timely intervention with a special focus on early intervention is often needed when families face adversity. And more intensive work is sometimes needed too. It's not just prevention. The model developed by McGregor and Devaney highlights the need to balance support and protection approaches within child welfare services and expand the traditional model that we know of categorizing and organizing services in their continuum for protective support and supportive protection for children and families by providing support and protection in a more integrated level. And in this diagram, as you see, there is a new level, 1A, which emphasizes informal support that needs to be promoted. These networks of informal support need to be supported and encouraged from pre-birth onwards. And once again, the need to pay attention to other issues such as other provisions such as work-life balance, the fight against poverty and inequality is fundamental. Our scoping studies all highlighted family and parenting support services and the need to be delivered, these to be delivered in a coordinated and holistic way. However, the lack of coordination was particularly highlighted in various national reports. What about practice? Practitioners working with children are expected to work in a transdisciplinary, collaborative, empowering, and non-judgmental way. And there are challenges there. I'm not sure I have time to go into them. Very often, professional support is, rather than transdisciplinary, is hierarchical and fragmented, and the different enormous number of professionals who work in the area, including educators, social workers, youth workers, social care workers, child workers, family therapists, midwives, doctors, the list goes on. All are expected to have developed a way of working that is value-based. I think this is important, engaging effective and evidence-based practice. And the relationship with children is meant to be collaborative, empowering, and non-judgmental. And of course, for all the sophisticated work to happen, the self-reflexivity of the professional is very important. That it is no wonder that in 2014, the WHO and the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University gave importance to the building of a skilled workforce when working with children and families, because the emotional regulation of professionals is important and is highlighted. Practitioners are not always empathic with families, especially during stressful situations, especially during traumatic circumstances. They are subject to vicarious trauma, and many of them end up being present, a lot of presenteeism, but maybe not the active, sophisticated way of intervening that we expect professionals to be performing. Many practitioners may privilege middle-class norms when working with children and their families, and better training, which would include service user involvement and an emphasis on self-reflexivity and supervision, could be extremely helpful in these circumstances. However, service user involvement is not mainstreamed in spite of the guidelines of the Council of Europe way back in 2007, and self-reflexivity is not always given importance. And as Nata and Kadima point out in 2009, not all practitioners are entitled to supervision. So these are some of the gaps. What are some of the current tensions and dilemmas faced by practitioners? One of them is around values, social justice and equity, core values. We have witnessed in the reports that poverty among children and families is still a major concern among European countries, and stark phenomena such as inequality related to income, inflation, and bad governance exacerbate poverty. The question even asked by Ruyon this morning, are we placing children in care because of poverty rather than because of abuse and neglect? And also, in practice, are we psychologizing and medicalizing poverty and racism, not just poverty, rather than perceiving it as a social injustice? Another point is family support, evidence-based. It was only confirmed in 11 reports of the country reports that we see, so we have a gap there. Gender inequality is very often not addressed by practitioners. They're happy to see the mother come, the father is not always there. And finally, the moral responsibility of the state vis-à-vis those living in poverty has implications on how family support is practiced. Do we blame families themselves for the economic situation? Clarity around the value system informing family support is so important. And here Europe has a lot to do, a lot of responsibility. Stark differences would emerge depending on family practitioners see themselves as fixing families and rescuing children rather than supporting egalitarian principles and intervening together with families. So state responsibility and commitment to improve and equalize children's living conditions and investment to achieve quality in children's life chances is very important. We see thus that the tensions and dilemmas are many, and we believe that a new way of looking at family support will help us address the current contradictions that have surfaced in the report. I will now hand over to Carmel to make some concluding comments.
Thank you, Angela. So in sum, I guess we see that multiple state structures and actions influence how family support is understood, developed, funded, regulated, delivered and evaluated. Critical components include legislation and government policy, with public spending, institutional arrangements, statutory guidance, state-funded or provided provision, and day-to-day practice informed by these instruments and policies. Our conception of family support incorporates a wide range of resource-based and service-based provisions as measures to enhance the capabilities and welfare of children, parents and families. Family support services need to be developed as part of a strategically managed approach based on a systematic population needs and risk assessment process, cross-sectoral service audits, planning and evaluation, rigorous research and stakeholder perspectives. And this includes an explicit position about what family and parenting support means, the scope of provision, and what policies and services aim to achieve. The practice domain, as Angela highlighted, constitutes the front line of family support from the perspective of children, parents and families and their engagement with state agencies and service providers in the delivery of that support. And it is the interface through which the policies and provisions are implemented and delivered and tailored and adapted as necessary to meet social support needs. Our scoping studies have indicated the significance of this domain in general and particularly the distinctive nature of family support as a professional practice paradigm. Consideration of professional ethos, practice, competencies and skills, and the nature of service provider and service user relationships and collaborations are critical issues in the development and delivery of family support. In order to promote and deliver the benefits of family support for children, families and societies, those involved in the development, delivery and receipt of family support must play and be supported to play a central role in considering issues, influences and challenges that manifest at the levels of policy, practice and provision. And in doing so, all three domains of family support, the policy, the provision, the practice, must be considered and included when formulating a comprehensive, coherent and collaborative reform agenda for family support. And critically, this formulation should incorporate a fourth domain, a participatory ethos, to ensure that supports provided are appropriate to the needs of diverse family forms, living in varied circumstances with varied needs, while respecting the agency of family members in determining their own lives.
Thank you, Carmel. I'm now going to introduce Agata Dadato as our respondent, who is Head of Programmes at Eurochild.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me heartily congratulate EuroFamNet for this comprehensive, holistic conceptualization of family support, this multi-level, multi-dimensional framework sets out a real way forward to develop family support policy, provision and practice within a participatory approach for family welfare, children's rights, gender equality and social justice. So this is really a step forward in our community. I'm from Eurochild. Eurochild is the EU network of children's rights organizations in Europe. As Eurochild, we know the need to sustain quality services that reach out the most vulnerable children and families. We know the importance of ensuring integration, better integration actually of services, and ensuring an enabling policy framework that reflects the needs of all children and their families in relation to family support, health, learning outcomes, etc., etc. In Eurochild, we've been advocating for ending child poverty for almost 2 decades now. Obviously, child poverty, we know, has a very negative impact on children's lifelong development and can impact very strongly on the economic development, long-term resilience of our communities and societies. And certainly family support is crucial to fighting child poverty and promoting child well-being. So this is really the starting point and the perspective we look at this from. According to data, to Eurostat data, from 2020 to 2021, over 200,000 more children in the EU were driven to the brink of poverty. While the situation varies from one country to another, and obviously there are some groups that are more exposed than others to poverty and social exclusion, in the end, the results is always the same. Children's rights are not respected, children's rights are not protected, and they are not fulfilled. So even temporary deprivation experiences can have devastating impact and consequences for a child, lasting a lifetime, if not generations. In particular, we know that early years of a child's life are crucial in determining their development, their physical, mental, social, and emotional development, as inequalities are typically established at very young ages of life. At the level of the European Union, and we've heard many times already this morning from Marie-Cécile and from colleagues before, promising commitments to upholding children's rights and reducing disadvantage and social exclusion have been made. The last milestone has been the European Child Guarantee, which has just celebrated its 2 years of life. And with this commitment, the EU has really demonstrated its political commitment to break child poverty and to tackle disadvantage across generations. But of course, to secure its success, the priority now is to turn this political commitment and goodwill into tangible measures to eradicate child poverty. EU and national leaders should now live up to their political commitment by submitting their ambitious and comprehensive, hopefully, national actions plans. As these are considered to be living documents that will remain in force at least until 2030, these plans should be regularly reviewed, regularly updated, ensuring rights-based, integrated, multidimensional approach, and really trying to ensure a deep interconnections, if you like, with the national, regional, and local scenarios that they relate to, because we live, obviously, in an evolving context. It will really be important, crucial to capitalize on the child guarantee, on this very unique tool to reach and support the most vulnerable and disadvantaged children, so that all children can really have nurturing care from the very start. And we've developed, in coalition with other partners across Europe, also a thematic paper on different key services that we talk about, so ECEC, early childhood education and care, but also safe and secure housing, access to maternal and child health care, adequate minimum income, etc., etc. Specific and targeted measures and interventions are needed to reach the most marginalized young children and their families. And the Eurochild Invisible Children Report, which has been recently published, it's on children in need across Europe, and it's compiled by 35 Eurochild members across 22 European countries. Well, also this report, and this is not surprising, stresses the importance of early intervention, prevention, and the prioritization of family support as part of the big solution, overarching solution for tackling child poverty, inequality, and social exclusion. One of the main recommendations our members are making is about investment in reforming the child protection system, and we've heard already in the morning some reference to the deinstitutionalization. Family centers should be expanded and focus on enhancing parent skills and on offering other support to keep families and children together to prevent separation of children from their biological parents. And to prevent their placement in alternative care. Now, Eurochild has also pioneered a model that aims to capture a systems-wide understanding of public investment in children and families. And this is called, the brand is Childonomics. The conceptual framework developed through Childonomics encourages analysis across the whole spectrum and landscape of policies, programs, and services that have an impact on children and families. It provides a way to map services and programs to help understand how different investments are interconnected and how they can contribute to different outcomes. It's really amazing to which extent the Childonomics framework aligns well with the Eurofamnet framework, which emphasizes the importance of all the three levels within a participatory ethos, policy, provision, and practice. And within the Childonomics framework, family support is also, not surprisingly, recognized as including a variety of provisions, including the economic and the employment support. And a correct implementation of the Childonomics methodology requires horizontal and vertical collaboration among policy departments and across different levels of government. So very much aligning with the framework that has just been presented. It provides a framework to bring policymakers together with other stakeholders, with the academia, with NGOs, to work towards the shared goal of improving outcomes for children and families. And the methodology also requires consultation with children and families. The measurement of outcomes can, however, be constrained by the lack of data, most often longitudinal data, and the need to give due weight to qualitative outcomes. Now, to conclude, there are some key challenges in the field of family support, the way I see it, and it's very much in line with some of the conclusions that Angela has drew our attention on. So first of all, the challenge in terms of inadequacy of monitoring policy and evaluation implementation. The second challenge is about putting the tendency to blame families rather than tackling the root causes of poverty and social exclusion, addressing structural barriers and inequalities. And then there's the more ideological challenge of core values which look at supporting equalitarian principles and intervening together with families through empowering them and building on their strengths. But of course, this requires funding, this requires a long-term vision, but it saves money in the long term. So undoubtedly, the Eurofam framework developed by the Working Group 2 will be useful in advancing our understanding and implementation of family support in Europe going forward. And again, my warm congratulations to the work that's been done over the last 4 years.
Jean, I think it's over to you now.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you to all the speakers. As we wanted to bring a piece of family support practice to the event, it is really a pleasure to have with us today Mercedes García Bernal and Pepa Torbisco, who are actresses who work with the Asociación Ponte. And Asociación Ponte works in Andalusia with families in conflict situations, and especially adolescents with conduct problems. And their methodology is, I think I'm echoing a bit. Their methodology is based on psychodrama interventions. They use scene performance as one of their key techniques in an interplay between actors and psychologists. Mercedes and Pepa will give a performance after each technical session based on their in-the-moment interpretation of the content of each of the sessions. And I just wanted to say that you are going to see them as they are going to act as a mother and her daughter.
¿Dónde estaba?
Where have you been?
Where are you coming from? I'm coming from the street. Where are you coming?
What do you mean the street? I don't like you out there on the streets in this neighborhood.
My dear Mama, you have to realize this is crazy. The situation is totally crazy. I know perfectly what you are saying.
I don't have money. I cannot afford a phone for you. I wish I could. I wish things were different, but they're not.
Sí.
That's a reality. Things are like they are. And that's it. The situation is as it is.
Una bolsa de ropa.
I believe we're getting a bag of clothes next week.
You're always telling me next week.
We cannot afford it. I don't even know if we can pay the rent. Maybe we'll get evicted tomorrow.
I know, I realize this is a very complicated situation.
Pepa, listen to me.
Mommy, stop crying. If you continue crying, I will leave the room.
At least when the grandparents were around, we had some support, but right now I don't even know I don't know what to do. I'm at the end of my wits.
I don't know, I'm sick and tired myself. I don't have any friends. What do you mean?
Friends.
Nobody wants to come with me. I'm always using the same clothes and everybody keeps on laughing on my face. That's the situation, Mom.
Where are you going?
Stop crying, Mom. I think the situation is very difficult.
Vamos a cenar juntas. ¿Qué quiere?
Let's have dinner together. What would you like for dinner?
What do you think I can have for lunch? Just spaghetti with tomato sauce. That's the only thing. Then why do you ask me? It's the only option.
I just don't know what else to ask.
No te vayas.
I'm sick and tired. I'm leaving. Leave me by myself.
thank you to our actors this morning. I'd now comments that have been coming in on the on-screen telegram. Our first comment is from Dr. Mandy MacDonald. Thank you for this comprehensive framework and for your poster that explained it succinctly. It was very helpful to have the various aspects mapped out so clearly. But the question is, how do you hope this conceptualization might help improve support for families? Carmel, would you like to address that question?
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Mandy. Yes, of course, it's a very appropriate question, because ultimately that's what we're hoping to achieve through all the work of Eurofamnet, is that we make some difference in terms of the services and supports that families are experiencing and receiving. Otherwise, there's no point to all of this work. So I suppose we feel, as John said earlier this morning, there were many gaps in terms of how we conceptualised family support in various countries, but also right across Europe. But certainly now we have, I suppose, what we would describe as a common understanding. We have a common language, and we have a strong emphasis on the need to connect and coordinate across those levels of the policy, the provision, the practice. And I suppose we also highlight and emphasise the need to invite in a very real and meaningful way, and to ensure we include the views of stakeholders, the views of families who use services, but also those that are providing the service providers. And I suppose the other point that we emphasise is the need for sustained provision, that the provision of family support doesn't ebb and flow, it doesn't disappear when austerity is there, or there's other pressing issues, or there's priority given to other areas of work or protection or something like that, but rather that there's sustained, ongoing, continued investment in the provision and the policy support for that provision over time, and also over the continuum. We really, I suppose, emphasise the need for the need for early intervention and prevention, but also support across the continuum. Support when there's need for protection, when the risks are high, and also when children or young people are in alternative care and placed in various care placements. So it's not something that just happens at one part of the continuum, one part of what services provide. And I suppose lastly, with that, we emphasise the need for practitioners to operate at a really high quality, to be trained, to be educated, to be knowledgeable, to understand what's needed to work with the 5-year-old, the 15-year-old, the young mother, the young father, the grandparent, whoever it might be that's providing the care and support. And that we have that high quality, that we invest in training and educating and supporting and supervising our practitioners to ensure that that they can provide the high level of practice across the continuum, as I say. So I know it sounds easy, as John said earlier, it's easy to say these things. None of this is easy to do in practice, and it's not easy to ensure that we have kind of the coordination and the sustained consideration of all of these levels all of the time across all of the countries in Europe. But I suppose we hope with this shared framework, this shared formulation, the 4 Ps of family support, as we can call it, that at least the tools, the basis, the foundation is there to ensure that coordination and that sustained investment and emphasis happens as we move forward.
Thank you, Carmel, for a very comprehensive answer. We have a question and a comment from Oyvind Christensen, if I've pronounced that correctly. Thank you for an interesting presentation. What is currently the most important challenge concerning the provision of family support across European countries? Harriet, would you like to take that question?
Yes, I will, although it's hard to whittle it down to one. So yeah, we've mentioned a few of the key challenges. I think the most significant challenge is the scale of adversities that children and parents and families and communities are experiencing. Even before the pandemic, the scale of widening inequalities and increasing child poverty rates in relation to a number of European countries, and the kind of intersectional, the kind of ways that different social risks play into that. So the complexities of those adversities and disadvantage in terms of the role of poverty, gender inequality, ethnicity, migrant status issues and how that links with disadvantage and marginalisation in society, disability, poor health rates, etc. So I think it's the scale of adversities, and then also part of the scale of adversities that parents and children experience are also to do with kind of social change and the increasing significance, say, of the digital world that we heard about this morning, and kind of navigating those social changes and particularly thinking about children's well-being. And then we've got the pandemic context and the current cost of living crisis and the uncertainties that we currently face. So I think all of those are kind of intensifying adversities. So the second half of that challenge would be, and again, I think the representative from the European Commission this morning put it very nicely, would be developing further and advocating and mobilising this evidence, but developing further our evidence base in terms of the social costs of all that adversity, in terms of compromised welfare prospects and the links between the rise in mental health support needs and educational support needs, etc. And then the key role of family support and the range of family support in relation to that, and making the political case to address the political challenge in terms of commitment to family support, but also we need significant cultural shifts in relation to it being okay to ask for early help, it being okay to turn to services, rather than that being necessarily a scary thing or a fearful thing, or waiting till your adversities are very serious before you get to that stage. So we need a cultural shift in terms of this isn't all about parental responsibility or family responsibility, this is about partnerships throughout society and with the state and children and families to recognise that adversity and address it.
Thank you, Harriet. Unfortunately, we don't have any time left for other questions and comments, but please do approach our presenters during the lunch break or coffee break. I'm sure Angela in particular would be keen to talk to you about that. So can I just say on all our behalves, thank you to our presenters today. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we hope you found it useful and stimulating. Thank you.
Lunch will be served in the same room where we had our coffee break. After lunch, at 1:45, we would like to take a group photo with everyone in it, if possible. So please gather at 1:45 at the main entrance, next to the vertical garden, which creates a nice background for the photo. And we will be back here at 2 o'clock for the next session. So buen provecho and enjoy your lunch.